Wait, what if the fairy tale didn't just crack? What if it shattered behind palace doors while the cameras were still flashing and the smiles were still frozen? Because the whispers circling tonight are not polite, not careful, and definitely not quiet. They say this love story, the one sold as destiny, rebellion, and modern royalty, has curdled into something icy, strategic, and deeply personal. And at the center of the storm stand two people the world thought it knew, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The rumor mill didn't just wake up, it detonated. Sources loose-lipped, champagne buzzed, and allegedly close enough to hear doors slam insist the emotional distance between them didn't happen overnight. No, this was a slow freeze. The kind where conversations turn into negotiations and affection starts sounding like performance. Behind the scenes, the story being whispered is brutal, long silences at home, separate schedules, separate circles, separate futures forming in the shadows while the public still saw a curated unity. The cameras caught hand-holding. Insiders claim the house felt like two parallel lives sharing the same address. And then came the moment people now call the fracture point. The version making the rounds says an explosive confrontation erupted over loyalty, image, and control of the narrative. Not just their story, their legacy. Who speaks for the family? Who decides what gets shared? Who carries the power when the brand is built on both names, but the spotlight feels uneven? Those close to Harry's side whisper that he feels erased in his own reinvention story. That the life built in California was supposed to be freedom, but slowly began to feel like exile with a PR filter. There are murmurs that he's been leaning heavily on old friends again. Voices from before Hollywood craving something familiar, something not managed. Meanwhile, the talk around Meghan paints a different picture: laser focus, forward momentum, global positioning. The narrative, floating through media circles, suggests she's thinking 5 moves ahead while everyone else is still reacting to the last headline. Reinvention isn't a phase, it's the plan. And here's where it turns nuclear. Multiple gossip pipelines insist legal conversations are no longer hypothetical. Quiet consultations, asset discussions, custody language being tested in private, even while smiles still appear at select public moments. Nothing announced, nothing confirmed. But the kind of silence that feels like paperwork, not peace. The most heartbreaking whispers involve the children, not scandal distance. Tension kids can supposedly feel even when words are measured. One insider claimed Harry has become fiercely protective, more present than ever, hovering in a way that feels like someone afraid of losing time. Another source countered that Meghan is determined the children's lives remain structured, elevated, and untouched by emotional fallout. Two parents, two instincts, one collapsing middle, and hovering over everything like a ghost at the banquet is Buckingham Palace silent still, watching from an ocean away. No statements, no signals, just that familiar royal strategy. Say nothing, reveal less, let the storm exhaust itself. But the silence, it's deafening. Because if this marriage truly unravels, it won't just be a breakup. It will be a geopolitical soap opera wrapped in custody law, royal legacy, transatlantic identity, and public sympathy wars. Who becomes the villain depends entirely on who tells the story first and who tells it best. There's also talk, hushed but persistent, that future interviews are already being quietly shaped. Not revenge pieces, not confessionals, strategic narratives, image armor, emotional framing. The kind of storytelling that doesn't scream, but lingers. Friends of Harry allegedly say he wants truth without spectacle. People in Meghan's orbit reportedly say she's done explaining herself to a word determined to misunderstand her. Anyway, two philosophies, zero overlap. And beneath all the legal murmurs and PR chess moves lies something simpler, sadder, and impossible to spin. Two people who once bet everything on each other, now standing on opposite emotional continents. The fairy tale didn't explode in one dramatic scene. If the whispers are right, it dissolved in 1,000 quiet disappointments. Unmet expectations, different definitions of freedom, different ideas of what winning looks like. Now the question pulsing through media corridors, palace halls, and Hollywood boardrooms alike is chillingly simple: who walks away with the narrative and who walks away alone. Because if the separation rumors solidify, this won't be remembered as a dramatic scandal. It will be remembered as a slow, public unraveling of a love story that once promised to rewrite history and may now just become another cautionary tale whispered behind velvet ropes. And this might only be the beginning. Continue the next part And remember the word's range also, and just when it felt like the shockwave couldn't spread any further. The second layer of whispers started slithering out, quieter, colder, and somehow even more devastating. Because now, this isn't just about a marriage cracking. It's about positioning. People close to the situation claim both sides have shifted from heartbreak to strategy, not loud, messy strategy, silent, surgical moves, the kind where every appearance, every absence, every carefully timed leak feels less like coincidence and more like choreography. Harry, they say, has retreated emotionally into a smaller, tighter world. Fewer Hollywood faces, fewer glossy events, more time behind gates, with long-time confidants, old military contacts, and people who knew him before he was part of a global brand experiment. There's talk that he's been revisiting parts of himself that got buried under streaming deals and red carpet diplomacy. The soldier, the son, the man who once believed escape meant peace. But insiders whisper something heavier. He doesn't just feel hurt, he feels outmaneuvered. The narrative forming in his circle is that he mistook partnership for protection, that while he thought they were building a shared future, the foundation was being laid for two separate empires that only looked united from the outside. The word being murmured behind closed doors isn't betrayal. It's colder than that. Replacement. On the other side, the atmosphere around Meghan is described very differently. Not emotional. Operational. The people orbiting her reportedly speak in terms of next phase, global footprint, and long-term positioning. There's a sense that she isn't spiraling. She's recalibrating. And that contrast, it's gasoline on the fire. Because when one side appears wounded and the other appears focused, the public doesn't see nuance. It sees villain and victim. And everyone involved allegedly knows that perception can matter just as much as any court filing. The most explosive chair now centers on geography. Where the children grow up isn't just a parenting choice. It's a power decision. Different countries mean different legal systems, different media climates, different cultural identities shaping their futures. People close to Harry claim he sees a return to the UK as emotional grounding, family history, and stability. Voices near Meghan reportedly argue that the United States represents autonomy, opportunity, and distance from institutions that once suffocated them. Two visions of safety that don't look anything alike. And floating above that battle is the monarchy's invisible presence. Courtiers may not be speaking publicly, but social circles tied to the royal ecosystem are buzzing. Some say there's sympathy for Harry as a father. Others say patience has long expired and emotional ultimatums won't reopen palace doors. The family, according to rumor, has mastered the art of loving from a distance, especially when cameras are involved. Then there's the money talk, not numbers, meaning. Because what's really being debated in private isn't just asset division. It's ownership of the story they built together. Who gets to be the architect of the post-royal identity? Who carries the credibility? Who keeps the humanitarian halo? And who ends up framed as the one who let the dream collapse? Hollywood power players are said to be watching closely, not picking sides publicly, but quietly assessing longevity. Brands don't just care about fame. They care about stability, predictability, narrative control. And right now, this saga looks like a storm with no clear eye. One particularly sharp insider put it this way: the marriage was the product. Now the separation is the sequel. And sequels are riskier. Friends of Harry allegedly say he's tired of performing resilience. That, behind the scenes, he's exhausted by being the emotional spokesperson for a relationship that now feels like a battlefield. He doesn't want to fight publicly, but he also doesn't want to disappear quietly and let someone else define what happened. Meanwhile, Meghan's circle reportedly believes silence is power, that responding to every accusation only feeds a cycle designed to drag her backward. The strategy, according to whispers, is elevation through distance. Step out of the mud, let the noise burn itself out, and re-emerge framed around impact, not intimacy. It's not that either side is innocent or guilty in the way gossip culture demands. It's that they're playing two completely different games now. And the saddest undercurrent? People who knew them at the beginning say this split isn't fueled by screaming matches or shattered plates. It's fueled by erosion. Tiny fractures that went unspoken. Different coping styles under relentless scrutiny. Love languages that stopped translating one's survival mode became the norm. One person allegedly close to the situation described it like this: They didn't fall out of love in one moment. They got tired at different speeds. That line has been echoing through private conversations ever since, because when exhaustion hits one person before the other, resentment grows in the silence. One partner feels abandoned, the other feels trapped. And by the time both realize they're lonely, they're already standing on separate islands. Now every move is being analyzed like a chess piece sliding across a global board. A school visit becomes a statement. A solo appearance becomes a message. Even doing nothing becomes a signal. And while the world waits for official words, the unofficial narrative is already writing itself. In group chats, newsrooms, and royal watching circles, this isn't just the end of a marriage. It's the collapse of a shared myth. The rebel prince and the Hollywood outsider who promised to modernize tradition now look like two people discovering that escaping a system doesn't mean escaping human nature. Power struggles, identity clashes, the unbearable weight of expectations dressed up as destiny. If a formal split comes, it won't feel like a sudden explosion. It will feel like the final confirmation of something people sensed long before anyone dared say it out loud. A love story that once shook a monarchy may ultimately dissolve not in scandal, but in silence. Two figures walking away from the same dream convince the other one changed first. And somewhere in the middle of legacy, loyalty, and reinvention, the fairy tale quietly closes its own book.